everyone. My name is Eddie, and I am a reference librarian here at WNPL. And together with my fellow librarian, Rachel, we will be presenting tonight's topic of navigating the news. A little housekeeping first. We always acknowledge and thank the friends of WNPL, whose fundraising through the Bookend Store, quarterly sales, and special events provide the community with all of these programs. For more information on the friends, you can check out our website at wnpl.info/friends, or the next time you're in the library, you can always request an application to join the friends from the circulation desk. We also have a couple upcoming programs in the next week or so that you should know about. ASES is doing a DACA workshop on Friday, September 9th, and that is all day from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. ASES will be here at WNPL to assist with DACA applications. Assistance is open for renewals by appointment only, and you can make those appointments by calling ASES directly. Also, next week on Wednesday, September 14th, from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m., also on Zoom, we are hosting a conversation with actress and author Marlee Matlin. This event is made possible by Illinois Libraries Present, a statewide collaboration between public libraries offering high-quality events. That will be an exciting and interesting program. For more information on upcoming events, feel free to visit calendar.wnpl.info, where you can browse our programs by date, location, and event type. We will be answering questions after the presentation, but feel free to drop them in the chat at any time, and we will get to them at the end. Rachel has also put some really important PDF links to some of the handouts and materials for this. So if you are able to go into the chat and download those now, that would be perfect. So navigating the news. This is a program here at WNPL that we've run in the past and will be hopefully running as a series in the future. And it is a very important topic. But just to get us started, why is navigating the news so important? What are we talking about when we mention navigating the news? Well, we as librarians have a principled and professional commitment to your access to information and freedom from censorship. We want you to have access to the most important and best resources that we can manage to put together for you and that you can access. And this applies to your news sources as well as it does your books and movies and other traditional materials. And with the rise of things like the internet and mass emails that we all have to deal with, as well as social media, we have access to more information than ever. But it's also more difficult to find and establish quality information amidst all the misinformation, disinformation, and sometimes even malinformation that finds its way into our news coverage. Now, news media is incredibly vital to our lives. It establishes our short-term and long-term goals. It connects us or it divides us with our communities, depending on how well it goes. And it determines how we understand events in our cities and our countries outside of our immediate access. It tells us which public figures that we should trust or which we should not trust. It tells us why things cost so much sometimes. It tells us whether or not our lives are going to get better or worse. And we should be taking it very seriously so that we're not getting the wrong information, that we're not being manipulated, and that we're not making poor decisions based on bad news or hasty assumptions. This presentation is meant first to expose some of the problems with how we get our news and how to react to it, but also follow up some of those troubling things with some very practical tips, tricks, and best practices to be responsible consumers of our news information. So to get us started, we really need a breakdown of the different types of bad information at the root of all of our problems.
Thank you, Eddie. We'd like to start tonight by describing to you the different types of inaccurate information or potentially harmful information that exist in the world of news. Unfortunately, there are different types of news that can really be inaccurate, and because it's inaccurate, it's harmful. There's three main types: misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. Now, misinformation is false information, but it's not intended to harm. This would be a case of like misquoting somebody. If you were to be trying to put out a quick news story, but unable to do so with the facts accurately, that would be misinformation. Disinformation is false information that is intended to cause harm. It is a lie. It is something that is put out there to manipulate your emotions, to manipulate the information that is present. And finally, there's malinformation. Now, malinformation is unique in that it is genuine information. It is, for the most part, true information, but it is intended to cause harm. Think of things like leaks or harassment or hate speech. That falls into malinformation. So when we're recognizing that sometimes in the news we can encounter inaccurate information, these are the types that we're talking about, and we need to look at what each of those types are. Go ahead, Eddie, to the next slide. Now, this is a very famous example of misinformation. This is mistaken information. In 1948, when Truman was running for president, the Chicago Tribune very famously published a front page story based on early election returns. And that story said Dewey defeats Truman. Now, the picture that we have on our screen here, that's a very famous shot of Truman after the actual election returns came in, gleefully holding up the front page, showing that he did in fact win. Now, this was not done intentionally by the Tribune. They were rushing to print, they were trying to meet a print deadline, and they were using early election returns to determine who won. In fact, Truman actually won by over 1 million votes, and so they did have to print a retraction. That is key. If some news organization, newspaper, magazine happens to print something that is misinformation, do they retract that or do they double down on it? The sign of a quality news organization will be somebody that is going to retract that and clarify instead of continuing to propagate that mistaken information. Now, unfortunately, because that information is already out there, it can continue to be harmful without that being the original intent. So misinformation can still be something that is really detrimental to our digestion of news and information because it can't really be pulled back once it's been said. Go ahead, Eddie. Thanks. Now, this is an example of disinformation. This is disingenuous, deliberately wrong information. Now, this is a pseudo site, as I would call it. It looks like it's trying to be the BBC. This is on Twitter. However, if you look at the Twitter handle, it is not at BBC. It is at BBC News UKI. That is not the BBC's Twitter handle. And this news story was, in fact, fake. The intention with disinformation is to put out information that's going to make you want to click on it. It's going to be something that is shocking. It's going to be something that is like clickbait. It's extreme or surprising headlines made to entice clicks. It can also be scammers posing as legitimate sources of information. And these are meant to upset and incite or excite their readers. So disinformation is somebody who is trying to put fake information out there for a purpose. Most of the time it is to make money. Every time somebody clicks on their Twitter account, that counts as somebody that's giving them a view. So this is why they're doing these things. They are making money off of it. There is some tangible effect that they get from putting this disinformation out there. So when you're talking about things like clickbait, that is exactly what we mean. It's somebody that is putting fake information out there to try to attract readers, to try to attract views. Next slide. Now, the third type of information that can be harmful is malinformation. Now, as I said earlier, malinformation is unique in that it actually has a true factor to it. There is actually some legitimate information included there, but this is manipulative true info that is intended to harm. The article that I have on my screen here was a review of after some early court cases were released earlier this year that people were doxing the Supreme Court justices. Now, doxing means that they were releasing things like their home addresses. As public employees, you can't actually find most people's home addresses. However, publishing that information out there publicly like that can be very dangerous, particularly when it comes to a situation where tempers and emotions are running high. They probably don't want groups of people gathering out in front of Supreme Court justices' homes. Reason being is that it can be trying to negatively influence what they're doing. So this article is highlights a form of malinformation. It is putting real information, honest information, real information about somebody's residence or address, putting it out there in order to affect the situation. You see this a lot with hackers, where they will actually steal information and try to hold it hostage for different companies because they want either money, influence, or power that they're getting from that information. So that is what malinformation is. It's going to be something that's actually true, but it's being presented in a way that can be harmful. So keep those three types of information in mind, because all of them can be something that we see routinely. But if we see them over and over again, it can really start to affect how we digest the information that we're reading. So try to recognize when you're seeing misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, and ask yourself, why is somebody trying to get me to read this? Why is somebody getting this information out there? What is their goal?
Thanks, Rachel. Now that we've identified some of the different types of misleading news, misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation, let's examine some of the problems with the sources of our news and how these things sneak into our viewing, our listening, and our reading. On this slide, you can see a breakdown of where we get our news by age and generation, as well as the percentage of those breakdowns of how we trust our news sources. I'd like to point out specifically that older generations tend to get their news from network news like Fox or CNN, newspapers, and radio, while younger generations tend to get their information from sources including podcasts and social media. But again, it's not that clear of a breakdown. One way to look at this all is that we have to understand there will be divisions between people who get their news from one source and people who get their news from another. Older adults use TV news, while adults under 30 are more likely to use social media. Not only does it matter that different demographics will use different sources as a whole, but it's really important to understand that different sources will inevitably cater to those demographics in order to retain and grow their audience. We'll talk a little later about the importance of treating all news as a business, but for now we need to focus on one aspect of our news sources that is especially problematic: that all generations, young and old, profess to receive their news from various media personalities, whether on radio, TV, or the internet. One of these big issues is that more people than ever, nearly 25% of people as of February this year, admit to getting their news and information from podcasters and news pundits. Podcasters and news pundits are not considered news sources. They exist for entertainment purposes only, and all of the examples above have said so, especially when being asked to be held accountable for misinformation or disinformation that viewers or listeners have received from their shows. They are not covering the news. Instead of a full and integral account of something that has happened, we are only receiving something that is meant to give us an emotional response, whether it's amusement, anger, satisfaction, superiority, or more. At best, they're giving you an opinion on the news, but they can also be misinterpreting or misleadingly highlighting aspects of the news in a way that fits a specific narrative that, again, like we said in the last slide, is targeted towards a demographic to either grow or retain a specific audience. We cannot consider ourselves informed if we only hear about current events through a filter that is meant to entertain instead of educate. And again, this happens to both sides of the aisle. And they don't necessarily have to mislead, but they can mislead through cherry picking. It's really important to watch out for someone who is potentially reporting something that happened, but is being very selective about the angle or the aspects about what is being reported. There are people who are going to pull things from headlines and then talk about the headline without getting into the details. This is very common on podcasts and pundits. They're going to talk about things that have happened, but not necessarily go into the factual reporting or talk about the larger context or give the full range of things that are happening because they have a specific agenda in alignment with the narrative that they're showing or the specific demographic audience that is following the show and have been for a long time. And again, this happens on both sides of the aisle. And you can see this reflected in a tool that we sometimes use called the media bias chart from Adfontes Media. Now, the media bias chart is a graph that places news outlets on a scale from inaccurate to factual reporting, as well as left-right leaning. Now, even the media bias chart is a money-making enterprise, and it changes regularly as standards of reporting rise and fall based on the different outlets. So you can't take it as gospel truth. You need to check it regularly, and you need to be discriminating and critical of things yourself. But they do a good job of placing outlets based on their commitment and track record of journalistic integrity, as well as reputation and standards. So things like when Rachel said at the beginning, if you make a mistake and you do the right thing and you post a retraction or clarification or you allow for a rebuttal, you're going to have a better track record. You're going to have a better commitment to your journalistic integrity standards, and you're going to do better on the media bias chart. And again, you can see things at the top like AP, Reuters, Newswires that we'll talk about later that have a higher commitment to factual reporting and land towards the middle of the chart. Whereas, like what we're talking about, editorials on both sides of the aisle are going to end up with more misleading information or, again, selective, incomplete, or unfair information, persuasion, or propaganda. And that happens on both sides of the aisle. We're going to revisit this chart later on in the presentation, but what we'd really like to point out is how our pundits and news personalities are so far away from even the network that they're affiliated with. So if you look on the left side of the chart and the right side of the chart on the lower angle, you're going to see more podcasts and pundits than you will even the news outlets that they're associated with that are more on the top of the chart towards the middle. So the top of the chart towards the middle is more factual reporting with less bias, either left or right on the levels of extremism. And towards the bottom is more misleading info or factually inaccurate or fabricated information, both on the left or the right of extremism. So for example, a left-leaning pundit might be considered Anderson Cooper. And you'll see on this chart how his editorial show and podcasts are further biased left and lower on the factual accuracy chart than even CNN, which is his home network. Now, the same thing is happening on the opposite side of the chart, where Sean Hannity's editorial show is further right and significantly lower on factual accuracy than Fox Online, which is even further and lower in accuracy than Fox Network and further in lower accuracy than Fox local news reporting. So it's really important to know the difference between factual reporting and editorialization, but also knowing the track record and potential biases of these various outlets that we're listening to.
Thank you, Eddie. Now, all of this information that's coming from people who are editorializing, because they're being selective in the information that they're giving you, in a lot of ways, what they're giving you really is disinformation, because they are trying to manipulate the data or the information in order to prove a specific point. So, what happens when we have an overabundance of disinformation, misinformation, or malinformation? Unfortunately, these all lead to apathy and fatigue. Now, when we experience news fatigue, that's where you're tired of hearing all the same stories. Every time you turn on the news, they're talking about somebody's fighting with somebody else had something negative to say about somebody else. This can truly affect how you feel about and approach the news. Now, the chart that I have on the screen right here, this was taken from a worldwide survey that was done. And they went through and actually said, tell us about, what reasons why you may or may not be watching the news. If you're avoiding the news, these were the most common reasons why in February 2022. Too much politics and too much talking about COVID-19, both of which, depending on how it's being discussed, can be extremely depressing. That was one of the primary reasons. The news has a negative effect on my mood. I'm worn out by the amount of news. The news is untrustworthy or biased. News leads to arguments I'd rather avoid, or there's nothing that I can do with this information. The point of disinformation isn't to get you to isn't to get you necessarily to believe a lie, but it can reinforce a lie. It can reinforce misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation. They want you to focus on the negative sides. They want you to focus on the negative side of a different group. They want to create apathy in you because it helps to obscure the truth. Creating apathy and generating apathy will make people only go to one or two news sources that are going to give them the kind of information that they want to hear, as opposed to listening to all sides, because that can be kind of exhausting sometimes. So this apathy allows the peddlers of disinformation to continue spreading it and to continue profiting off of it. As Eddie was just saying, all of those pundits and all of those podcasters, they are very popular and they are making a great deal of money by giving you their opinion on the news. They're making a lot of money off of that, or they wouldn't be doing it. And if you're thinking about it from that standpoint, that they're selling me what they think I want to hear, in a lot of ways, it can actually increase your apathy because it can be frustrating, but it will enable you to understand that this is just one person's point of view. Maybe I shouldn't be just focusing on this one person or one group or one news agency. Perhaps I need to spread out and hear things from a different point of view. They want to spread this because apathy enables, again, those agents of disinformation to perpetuate disinformation, and it's not a stance of neutrality. So keep that in mind. Whenever you are looking at the news and it's really starting to get to you, that's kind of what they want to do. They want to make sure that you are focusing just on one or two sources that match what they are telling you. So please keep that in mind. Now, this can lead to something called the illusory truth effect. If you keep hearing the same pundits, the same information, and the same point of view being repeated all of the time, repeated lies can begin to sound like the truth, and that is called the illusory truth effect. This is a quote from an article, which was actually super fascinating. I put the link down at the bottom of the page so you can take a look at it if you'd like to. But the quote is, when you're hearing something for the second or third time, your brain becomes faster to respond to it. So this means that your brain is attributing that fluency as a signal for being true. This is from Lisa Fazio, who's a psychologist at Vanderbilt. And she said, the more you hear something, the more you'll have this gut level feeling that maybe it's true. If you hear a rumor over and over again, if you keep hearing the same story over and over again, even if there isn't any truth behind the rumor, you begin to believe it because your brain is telling you, oh, I've heard that before, so it must be true. So keep in mind that repeating disinformation, repeating malinformation, repeating misinformation is a technique that is being used in order to try to get you to change your mind or to manipulate your mind so that you will believe what they are telling you. So it's just something to be mindful of. You want to be aware that the more you hear something, you really do kind of need to pause and say, well, wait a minute, have I been shown any proof of this? I've only heard the claim. Have I actually seen any proof? Go ahead, Eddie.
Thanks, Rachel. Like Rachel says with the illusory truth effect, another thing that happens to us when we fail to be critical is that we can wind up in an echo chamber. If we're constantly avoiding things that maybe we don't want to test, maybe we're sick of hearing, or maybe make us uncomfortable because it requires some of our critical thinking skills, or maybe it requires us to face uncomfortable truths, we can wind up in an echo chamber. And an echo chamber is when you hear things you end up in a place where you're not hearing any conflicting opinions and you hear those things over and over again that you fail to test whether they are true or not. And this is part of something that we call confirmation bias. If you hold a belief that will not change, no matter with what facts you're presented to you, that belief becomes a dogma, and you're not able to read or listen or view things objectively or critically. People give special treatment to information that supports their personal beliefs, and they give special treatment to people who agree with them on fundamental levels. So, confirmation bias and echo chamber also surface in our tendency to look for positive instances. When we're looking for information to support our hypotheses or our expectations for things that we already believe to be true, we're going to look for positive evidence that confirms those things rather than information that might prove it to be false or more complicated or in need of more balance. Confirmation bias is important to focus on because it leads people to hold strongly to false beliefs or to give more weight to information that support our beliefs than is warranted by evidence. People may be overconfident in their beliefs because they have accumulated evidence to support themselves, when in reality, much evidence refuting their beliefs is being overlooked or ignored. Evidence which, if considered, could lead to less confidence in one person's beliefs. These factors may lead us to risky decision making and to overlook warning signs and other important information in the future. And confirmation bias can really stack up as we continue to believe things that are false, misleading, or misinterpreted because it's either what you're looking for or because the perpetrator of misinformation has already figured out through this pattern that you've established what you're susceptible to, especially if that can be lucrative. So if we're continually following misinformation because it feels good, we're establishing a pattern that we're not going to look the other way and we're not susceptible to criticism or critical thinking. It's really easy to market to us. Handling our own confirmation bias requires us to think critically before you even seek out information and be aware that you are casually consuming news versus critically consuming news. This is really important to think about when we're maybe even searching social media, and within all of the pictures of our friends' vacations and funny comments that our coworkers are making on our social media platforms, all of a sudden there's news information that is popping in interspersed. So we're casually consuming these things, meaning we're more susceptible to having a slight reaction to a headline versus critically examining what's happening in our world, what the context of the article is saying, and what authority that's brought to us in. So, for example, let's say an article comes out about stock trading in Congress. Now, the factual reporting includes information that representatives from both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, liberal and conservative, or potentially their family members on their behalf, are engaging in stock trading, which could be considered either insider trading or an abuse of their power. Now, if the article names several members who are the most grievous culprits of their behavior and gives some of the historical background of attempts to ban or limit speculative trading from legislative grants because they're privy to non-public information that influences stocks, you have a few options. If you're not engaging critically, confirmation bias looks like this: not seeking out objective facts. You could say, oh, I see several members of Congress that I disagree with regularly, and they're named in this. I'm going to focus in on that. Instead of focusing in that both sides of the aisle are engaged in this, and both sides of the aisle are also engaged in historical opportunities to ban or limit stock trading. You could also only remember details in the future that confirm your beliefs. The number of Republican congressmen or congresswomen engaged in insider trading is greater than the number of Democrats, but the only limitation set on this behavior happened under a Republican administration, and the Speaker of the House, who is a Democrat, is one of the bigger culprits. With confirmation bias, it's really easy to pick a side and conveniently ignore specific facts. Ignoring or dismissing information that conflicts with your beliefs is a prime example of confirmation bias. And living in an echo chamber only reinforces the things that happen to confirmation bias and makes it harder for you to see things objectively. Another thing that we run into all too often is science and health misinformation. Biostatistician Dr. Ruth Etzioni, puts it best when she says, headlines should only be used to decide whether or not to read an article. They're written to grab eyeballs, and they're often inflammatory and not scientific. Science and health related articles can be rife with misinformation, misleading headlines, or unproven claims. We've all seen these headlines, usually at the grocery counter, that say things like, "Bananas are as good as drugs for treating HIV, says scientists." Or, "Can underwire bras cause breast cancer?" Or, "Study shows cell phone usage could contribute to male pattern baldness." We all worry about our health. As we've seen, especially over the last few years, developments in the scientific community can have a significant impact in our daily lives and our relationships with other people. The most important thing to remember is that the standards and process of scientific discovery is very different from those of journalistic discovery and reporting. The scientific method requires first a question and then research, a hypothesis from the findings of that research, experimentation, observation, analysis, presentation, and then peer community review. And thankfully, when it comes to actual treatments and practices, regulations require strict procedures, testing, and review before releasing them for use on the public. And we wouldn't want it any other way. A lot of misinformation on science or health is taken from the early stages in this scientific process in order to get the first scoop on whatever's happening. If a student at a respected university is looking into the effects of bananas on HIV or coffee and cancer risks, why not we just report it right now instead of with a headline that makes people think that it's already truth in the scientific community, or at least gets traffic to the website or people to buy the magazine, rather than waiting until they have the final results of the testing? Well, the reason that we wouldn't do this is because it's not necessarily true. It might have relevance in a larger context, like potassium is an important factor in immunity response, but the headline is misleading even if the article states that the claim is still being tested, because it's attempting to get our attention and say that it's potentially a proven fact or could be provable at this stage in testing. Presenting it as the results of the study instead of a subject of one allows for things like confirmation bias to set in before the reader even reads the article, and therefore you can't really examine it with a critical lens. The takeaway here is that neither the scientific method or the Food and Drug Administration operate at the speed of a 24-hour news cycle. From the University of California, Berkeley publication, How to Spot Misleading Science Reporting. Most news articles offer only a snapshot of a particularly exciting finding in the scientific community. Rarely do they dig into preceding studies or contradictory findings. So, science headlines often report hypothesis or inconclusive evidence at early stages of scientific testing or development as misleading and incomplete headlines. So, what can we do? This is really the question. We've presented a lot of information that is potentially uh, a little hard to take. There's so much misleading news, there's so much malinformation and a lot of disinformation, and it almost seems overwhelming. And as one person, even as a librarian, I can tell you, I don't necessarily naturally have all the tools to navigate the news by myself. Even as professionals, we have to remember our responsibility to the public, each other as colleagues, and ourselves for growth and development. And this brings us back to our principles, and those are access, intellectual freedom, and quality and selection of materials. And for these reasons, because there is no one perfect objective source, we're not going to recommend any one publication or news outlet. We all have different needs and different capacities, so navigating the news is going to look different to each of us to achieve the same goal or being critically informed. The best thing we can recommend is a variety of affordable, ethical, and effective ways of accessing and evaluating your news. And the best thing that we can do is be prepared to engage in them and to understand our limitations and accept that we need to do specific things before interacting with the news and as we react to the news.
Thanks, Eddie. Now, Eddie introduced you to this graphic earlier in our presentation, but I want to take a little bit more time to show this tool to you and explain to you how this can be really useful to you. Now, going forward, we are going to be discussing different tactics that you can use to help you navigate the quagmire that is our current news output. Now, the media bias chart is a for-profit business. However, they actually have a very large staff of people that uses a standardized rubric to analyze the output of thousands of different media outlets. That means that all of the different news sources are evaluated using the exact same criteria. So there isn't favor being shown to one particular side of a particular argument. There's no favor being shown to a particular media outlet. These individual news sources are all evaluated based on what they are reporting. Now, this is not a static chart. What we're looking at here on our screen, you'll see that it's got the kind of a pyramid shape. And that chart is rating how different news agencies are reporting. Now, I'm going to take a second and share with you my screen, and I'm going to take you to this actual website so you can see what it looks like. Well, we've got it up on a screen. All right, you should be seeing what I'm looking at now. If you're not, let me know. Okay, so this is the media bias chart. It's actually on a website called Adfontes Media. And this is an example of what they do. Now you'll see at the very top, it's telling us that it's analyzing 1,832 separate news sources. When we scroll down on the screen, we can now see a pyramid of news sources. And when we're analyzing what the best resources are, what are the top resources? Well, there's no one answer to that. There are several quality news sources out there, but you're going to want to actually use multiple news sources to always get the best information. What we could see at the top of our chart here are news resources that are going to be things like news, these are going to be different reporting newswire services. So things like AP and Reuters. And then going down from there, we see things like PBS. This is the interactive version of the media bias chart. So what we're seeing, these little gray dots in the background, those are actually individual articles that have been written by a specific news source, and they're plotting all of those individual articles on here as well. That's why the different news outlets are all showing up where they are, because it's based on the content of specific reporting. Now, when we're scrolling through these, you can see that most of the ones at the center top, which is going to be the least biased, most effectively written, things that are going to get you straight facts and information, are all mostly coming from newswire services, things like AP and Reuters. The reason is because those are going to be the least biased because they sell information to all different sides of the spectrum. Eddie's actually going to tell you a little bit more about that in just a second. But this tool, if we're looking at each of the different graphic boxes here, this top green box is telling you they've rated these sources as the most reliable for news. The reason being is it's the most straight factual reporting. It's the fewest use of emotional words. It's the least amount of editorializing, and it's the straight facts. For example, if there were a car accident on Grand Avenue, and it was reported as there was a car accident today on Grand Avenue at 4 p.m., 2 cars were involved, 2 people were sent to the hospital. That's straight factual reporting. Editorializing would be, well, there was another accident out on Grand Avenue. It sure is dangerous out there. Somebody was driving recklessly, something, giving it their actual opinion on what happened. That's when it starts straying from being just factual reporting and it's going into being an editorial. So when we're looking for news sources that are going to be the most factual, the most straight news, that's going to be the top of the pyramid here. Now, as I said, there's not one best source. There are several of them. And at different times, different news sources will be closer to the top center of the pyramid. It depends on what stories they've been covering, and it depends on what stories they've been discussing and how they've been discussing them. So I would really suggest that you come take a look at the interactive media bias chart. It's a wonderful way to get a much better idea of how the information you consume on a regular basis, where that actually falls when it comes to whether or not it's balanced or biased, if it skews right or left, or if it's less reliable. The further down toward the bottom of this pyramid we go, the less reliable the information is. And I also want you to keep in mind the people reviewing these articles and going through and plotting them come from all different political backgrounds. They hire people from around the country and around the world to do this news analysis and use the same rubric for it so that you can see different points of view, how they fall on here, so you have that tool. Now, that doesn't mean we're not saying that you can't watch or read any of the sources that are falling to the bottom of this pyramid. Of course you can. You absolutely can. You have a right to read whatever you'd like. But when you're looking for the straight facts of the situation, we encourage you to take sources from the top of the pyramid here. Go ahead, Eddie. I think you might have to share your screen again. Sorry.
No worries. Let me get back to our slideshow. All right. Thanks, Rachel. So yes, like Rachel said, if you're looking for the most factual and the most balanced information, factual reporting, one of the best tools you can use, and that's why we have it marked as a tactic up here, is to use a newswire service. Now, what is a newswire service? A newswire is an online service that allows companies to post press releases and other announcements to the public. And journalists monitor newswire services and pay for access to newswire services to pick up stories that they think are worthy of coverage. They electronically provide up-to-date information to the media about breaking news, issues, and events, but you as a consumer can follow newswires too as a more objective and trustworthy form of information. The most popular and prolific newswires are the Associated Press and Reuters, but there are also more profession-specific newswires like business wires and press release feeds for things like sports league and the entertainment industry. What most PR professionals would be referring to when they mention the wire or a newswire is essentially a press release feed. These are wire services that usually for a fee to these big companies, they'll post press releases from companies that subscribing journalists and outlets can access. And there are newswires that exist for the English language journalists that represent all news stories from specific countries, like the Canadian News Press, the News Trust of India, and the Agence France Presse. Newswires are funded by publications to provide accurate and timely reporting that they can turn into more stylized and complete articles. So these newswires will present all of the facts of the information or a very concise and specific outline of something that has happened, something that is expected to happen, or something that has just recently broken, so that different news agencies and outlets on all sides of the spectrum can pay for that immediate access to factual reporting. And then later on, as it goes through both the news outlets and then the podcasts and pundits, they can apply their own editorialization or context or representation, or in some cases misrepresentation later down the line of what the newswire originally reported. But again, like we'll talk about in a second, all news is a business. So a newswire is really helpful because the business of a newswire is to provide quick and concise information, factually accurate information to different news agencies. So their business model is based on factual and concise reporting. You're not going to get a lot of interpretation, you're not going to get a lot of editorial context, but you're going to get the straight facts as much as possible. And again, if AP or Reuters or Business Wires factually inaccurately presents information or it misrepresents information in a way that goes counter to their business model, and they're accountable to other news agencies for that. They're typically funded by publications to provide accurate and timely reporting that, again, they can turn into more stylized and complete articles. If you're having trouble navigating publications that put spin on stories or maybe charge your emotions, try out a newswire to get more concise, objective, and reliable information without all the editorializing or cherry picking based on what sells to specific audiences. You can see the different spin that news agencies put on objective facts by comparing the original newswire to different headlines that publications put out. So maybe if you're seeing one perspective from somebody that's more biased to the left, and then a different perspective that somebody's putting out more biased to the right, check on the original newswire that they're citing in the source, and you can get more factual information that way. Another tactic that we use is to apply the rigorous standards of journalistic integrity. And you can both do this by checking on different news agencies' commitment to journalistic integrity in their mission statements, either online or in print, and by also internalizing these standards to yourself while you're reading. And these standards of journalistic integrity might vary, but they generally boil down to five general principles. And those things are accuracy, which is verification and fact checking during their reporting, independence, impartiality, and avoidance of bias. So, making sure that they're not compromised by ownership or by affiliation in any way. Honesty, which includes transparency and accountability. If they're cherry picking or if they're, using singular sources, talk about their inability to maybe get a hold of the second party in a case. Talk about past mistakes. Reliability. Do they have a credible track record? Are they using numerous sources regularly? And accountability. If they make a mistake, do they provide a correction? If they offer a very singular point of view or a one-sided aspect to an issue, do they offer a rebuttal in the future? Now, some really good commitment statements on journalistic integrity have been written by the Society of Professional Journalists, the International Federation of Journalists, the American Press Managing Editors, the American Press Institute, and the Frontline Journalism Fund. And these include journalists from all aspects of the political spectrum, from all different countries, and reporting in different languages. But remember, again, it's up to us as readers to read critically and hold our sources accountable. And I think that these principles are valuable and important for us to test our news sources by. Most reputable publications will provide readers with their definition of journalistic integrity and pledge their commitment to those principles. I highly recommend taking your favorite news outlet and checking to see what their journalistic integrity statement looks like. But again, it's really easy to pledge commitment to journalistic integrity and sometimes a lot tougher to follow through. But as a news consumer, it's really good to know how your sources define their commitment and whether or not it's been reflected in past and current reporting. Is there evidence of commitment to accuracy, or have there potentially been sensationalized stories in the past? Have unreliable sources been given more credibility than they deserve in the past? Have they printed something without verification? Do they have conflicts of interest, such as ownership or different sponsors or advertisers that maybe do or do not get favorable reporting in different stories? Have they avoided printing negative news about a parent or advertising company? Do they potentially have a regional bias? Have they been transparent with their sources and citations? Have they printed retractions or corrections for errors and given space to rebuttal for editorials? All of these things are part of principles of journalistic integrity. Another thing we highly recommend you do is read and watch things outside of your comfort zone. We talked a little bit earlier about confirmation bias and echo chambers. These things happen when we're failing to think critically and by habit not engaging with things that test the things that we believe or our convictions of things that we've believed in the past. And one of the things that we can do is read and watch out of our comfort zone. This is something that we highly recommend as librarians because, most importantly, we just want you to read and to enjoy reading, but also because reading has great benefits to your life. It's proven by testing that reading builds skills like organization, vocabulary, comprehension, and analysis. And all of these things apply to how well we navigate the news. Reading and watching fiction can improve your empathy and critical thinking because we're engaging with characters that maybe at the beginning don't seem necessarily trustworthy, and we think about them critically and we engage with them and we see how they behave in the story. When it doesn't count, we can read a little bit more intently and we can read a little bit more critically when it does count. Be proactive with your entertainments and your information habits. If you regularly challenge your assumptions by reading diversely, whether fiction or nonfiction, you're going to be less susceptible to things like confirmation bias and echo chambers when you're reading the news. Maya Jikic, a psychologist at the University of Toronto, wrote at one point in Mental Floss in an article in 2018, in our real lives, we feel often like we have to make a decision, and therefore we close our mind to information that could eventually help us. But when we read fiction, we practice keeping our minds open because we can afford uncertainty. If we're reading and thinking critically outside of our comfort zone for our pleasure reading, we're going to be able to build those tactics like organization, comprehension, analysis, and critical thinking that can be later applied to reading and navigating the news.
All righty. Another tactic that we can all try to do on a regular basis is to check the context of what is being said. Now, on my screen here, I actually have an example of an article. The link for the article is at the bottom of the page. So if you want to go back and check what we're showing here, you can absolutely do that. It's from a blog called Food Babe. Now, in this article, there are claims that are made that are not backed up by the information provided. So when we're checking the context, we are going back and saying, well, this information has been provided. Is it contextual? Is this what the resources that they're quoting are actually saying? So this article, this is a quote in the yellow box. It says, the health of Americans is downright grim, according to a report just released by the Institute of Medicine and the National Research Council. Now that blue text there indicates that that is a link. So if you click on that link, it should take you to the resource that they are quoting. Now the quote continues, it declares, quote, Americans are sicker and die younger than other people in wealthy nations. The United States spends 2.5 times more on healthcare than any other nation. However, when compared with 16 other nations, we come in dead last in terms of health and life expectancy for men and near the bottom for women. Now, checking the context and the claims of this article, when we go into this blog and we click on that link for the Institute of Medicine and the National Research Council, it's quoting a report. So we would assume that if we click on that link, it's going to take us to that report. However, the referenced link does not lead to the stated report. It actually leads to a USA Today news report. It also does not directly refer to or link to the report that they're stating this information comes from. What it basically comes down to is you're getting like fourth-hand news because you're taking somebody's opinion of somebody's opinion about something that was written in a report, and then they're drawing a conclusion from it. So unless we are being provided with the source of these claims, we actually cannot verify that that information is true. There's no citation for this information listed. So the actual name of the report is never given, not in the USA Today article, and certainly not on the Food Babe blog article. So we cannot accept those claims as being truthful. Poor research and faulty citing of sources should always make us question the validity of any article. If they cannot provide you where they got their information, then it's not information, it's just an opinion. We're all entitled to opinions, but if something that is opinion is being packaged as fact, then that's being disingenuous and dishonest. Go ahead and go to the next one, Eddie. Thank you. Now, the next tactic is that we can corroborate the information. Now, this is similar to what we were just talking about with checking the context. We want to be able to verify the information that's being presented to us. Can we find other sources that are also stating this? Can we find other reputable sources of information that can say, yes, this is actually what's being said? Now, the example that we have on the page here is from a news site called Real Raw News. And it is saying that the IRS is using tax revenue to fund a sniper school for IRS agents. It quotes, an administration whistleblowing speaker under condition of anonymity, they're anonymous, for fear of reprisal as the source for this information. Anytime that you cannot see who the source of something is, doesn't matter from what side of the system you're on, if it's left or right, if they can't give you who their source is, be skeptical of that. Now, anonymous sources are a thing, people will quote them, but keep in mind that an anonymous source, somebody who's not willing to stand behind what they are claiming, is always going to be somebody that's going to have less to back them up. They are going to be less believable, they're going to have less to lose, so therefore they could make something up if they wanted to. So be very careful when somebody will not tell you who the source of their information is or where they're from. The witness in this article further states the IRS is looking to cement itself as a militarized arm of the government, just like the FBI. Again, there's nothing in this article that is showing us where they're getting this information other than an anonymous source. Doing a search of other legitimate news sources and trying to corroborate this information shows us that nobody else was reporting these facts. There were other people that were reporting their opinion on why there was funding included in a new bill for the IRS, but none of that was factual. There was no factual basis for why they were saying that this was being sent to fund a sniper school. So unless you can see the actual details of who's saying this, why they're saying this, and where they're getting their information from, you need to remain skeptical. That doesn't mean that it can't remain on your radar. It absolutely can. But you can't believe it and accept it as being truthful until you can see the information that is there to back it up. So if you're interested, again, the link for this article is at the bottom of the page. You could definitely check it out for yourself and see what their claims are, but then go and try to corroborate this information. You can do a Google search. You can utilize some of the sources that we have here at the library, like our Gale reference resources or our Chicago Tribune archives. You can also use, we've got several different newspaper databases. You can absolutely search through those resources very easily and quickly with your library card to check to see, is anyone else reporting this? Go ahead on to the next one, Eddie. All righty, another tactic is to find out if the photos that are being used in an article really apply to that article. Google allows you to do something pretty fun. It actually lets you do something called a reversed image search. You can go back and see the origins of a picture that's included in a news article. So if you found an article and it's showing you a photograph and you want to be able to go back and say, well, is this picture really part of what's going on here? Is this actually going to be a stock image, or is this what's actually going on at present? If you are in Google Chrome, you can actually right-click over a picture and it will give you the link for search Google for image, and Google will find all of the sources for that particular image. Now, the picture that we have on the screen here is actually a really, really good example of this. Now, when this picture was first published, it suddenly started showing up all over different Facebook feeds and on Twitter. And the caption that was included with the picture said that this child is an orphan and he's sleeping between the graves of his parents. This was in Syria. And that this is obviously a very sad, very touching picture. But we want to know, is that actually what was going on here? So we actually did a reverse image search on it. Go ahead to the next slide, Eddie. The real story behind this image is that it was an art project. It was a staged art project by photographer Abdel Aziz Al-Atibi. The young man in the pictures is actually his nephew. The graves are not real. They built them specifically for this photo shoot. And it's a wonderful example of how emotional reactions can make people far more likely to believe a news story and to share a news story without verifying it first. This young man's parents are alive and well. He has a very happy family life, but the picture was being shared saying that he was sleeping between the graves of his parents because that pulls on the heartstrings. It draws you into the story more. So rather than just accepting that the image that you're looking at was actually part of the story, go back and check to see the origins of the picture. More and more, you'll find that different publications, particularly people on social media, may be using photographs to mislead you, to have you think that there's something else going on, or to tug at your heartstrings so that you'll be more likely to share something. Go ahead, Eddie.
Now, another tactic is related to something that is very new and in a lot of ways a little bit frightening, and that is deepfakes. And the tactic is to train yourself to spot deepfake images. Now, what is a deepfake? A deepfake refers to a computer generated image, video, or sound file that uses thousands and potentially millions of different pictures and audio clips and video clips through an algorithm to mimic humans. Now, deepfake videos have been created of famous people and distributed for entertainment purposes. Sometimes famously, I know that there's a deepfake artist who does a really convincing Tom Cruise, and he'll have Tom Cruise trying out the newest soda product. And I don't know if anybody here has seen the one of the more recent Star Wars films, Rogue One. They used algorithms to recreate a very young Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia and a younger Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin for that film. And so deepfake images can be used for entertainment purposes, but they can also be used for malicious and deceptive reasons. So, again, deepfake is an evolving form of artificial intelligence, and it's adept at making certain media appear to be real, but it's in fact a forged video or photo meant to fool you. In the past, we've had to deal with things like Photoshop, and Photoshop gets very close, but again, that's manipulated by a person, and it can be interesting to see how Photoshop has failed in the past by different lines that get curved when trying to edit images or different lighting that gets mistaken. But deepfakes, because of their just using so much that is fed through an algorithm to make it look real, can be a little harder to spot. So we have a tool which has been put into your resources that are available in the chat. That is some different ways to spot deepfakes and computer generated photos, film, and audio. One of the tools is whichfaceisreal.com. And you can click on this link in the slides that we put in PDF form in your chat. And you can use it to read up on the different ways that deepfakes can be spotted. You can use it as a deepfake detection challenge. So they'll put two pictures to the left and to the right, and they'll ask you which one is real and which one is fake. And there are several different ways that you can see, you can spot a deepfake. And so the tactic for this one is to familiarize yourself on the different ways that deepfakes fail so that you can spot it and you can know this is an image that has been fabricated in order to mislead me or to lie to me. A couple of the different things that are worth writing down or so that you can spot them and you can train yourself to spot them are deepfake videos have very unnatural eye movement. It's very hard to compute for computers to figure out how to make eye movements like blinking or rolling your eyes. It can be really difficult to spot that in a deepfake. So those are huge red flags. If you're watching a video and it seems hard to believe and they don't blink for 10-15 minutes, then yeah, that's a big red flag. Another thing is unnatural facial expressions. If something doesn't look right about the face, it could signal something called facial morphing, and that occurs when one image has been stitched over another. Awkward face positioning. If somebody's face is pointing one way and their nose seems to be pointing another way, you could be skeptical about the authenticity. sometimes unnatural coloring, discoloration, weird lighting. A lot of times you can see on this picture on the screen, there's something called a water drop, and it's below her left ear facing us to the right. That happens sometimes when you're trying to get the lighting and the contours of a face, and a computer algorithm has stitched thousands of faces together to create one face over another. One thing that computers have a hard time with is that teeth don't look real and hair don't look real. It's really easy to get the facial structure together, but that when you get to the finite things like teeth and hair, it can get a little bit hard to render those things. So pay attention to those things, as well as blurring and misalignment of things in the background. So in this case, on which face is it real, you're going to click the person that you think is real. Now, the person on the right is actually real, and the person on the left of your screens is not real. And you can actually see the teeth are misaligned, the hair tends to blur, and then the person to the left there is starting to blur because it's very difficult to get everything in one picture make looking natural and not avoiding some of these discrepancies. And again, you can also use things like Rachel mentioned in one of her last slides, where you can look up this image and see if it has any other pings, if it's been used in any other context and it's being used in a way that is being misleading you at this point. Another tactic that you really need to pay attention to is checking the date and the timestamp. When you check a date and timestamp, you're just seeing to see if this headline that you're reading or this thing that you're seeing spread around, especially if this article is showing up on social media, is not just factually accurate, but also relevant to the situation. So on top here, we have an article and the headline reads, Ford shifts truck production from Mexico to Ohio. And on the bottom, the same story is, and as well as the picture. So if you do the Google image search, backward searching, you'll have this pop up as well in your feed. You can see this article is published about a year later, and it says, the Trump effect. Ford is already shifting truck production from Mexico to Ohio. So you have two headlines, and both of them are saying more or less the same thing. But if you look at the first headline and you check that timestamp on there, it says August 17th, 2015. On the bottom, it says November 16th, 2016. So the top article was printed based on, the news that Ohio is shifting truck production from Mexico to Ohio. It's good news for American economy. It's something that is important, especially to the auto industry and Ohio labor organizations. Some people are, it means jobs to a local area. Whereas the bottom, it's being editorialized and it's saying the Trump effect, and it's attributing Ford shifting truck production from Mexico to Ohio as something that happened as a result of the Trump election. So Trump was elected president in November of 2016, and he was inaugurated in January in the following year. But again, this is something that was already in effect a whole year prior in 2015. So if you want to get factual and accuracy and understand how things could be potentially editorialized or manipulated, you need to check the time and date stamp to see how things have happened. And this happened a lot during the pandemic. So a lot of things were being reported about coronavirus and different developments in vaccine technology, and they were pulling headlines from the past that were just not necessarily relevant to what was happening at the time, and they were being misinterpreted to both sides of the aisle. So they were being misinterpreted to talk about the dangers of coronavirus. They were being misinterpreted to talk about how coronavirus wasn't really that dangerous. And all you really needed to do was check the date and the timestamp about the information that was being pushed as currently relevant to see this is information that was maybe relevant to a different time and place. And again, it could be, one way or the other, meaning one thing according to what you believe, but you can see the bottom is editorializing something, and you need to check the date, the time, as well as the sources and the information of the article. So if you read the article up on top, it could say Ford listed these reasons why they were shifting production from Mexico to Ohio. It could talk about the negotiations. It could talk about the different things that were happening. Whereas if you only read the headline of the article on the bottom, it leads you to accept something to be true, whether it's factually accurate or relevant to the situation or not. One thing that's really, really important, no matter what tactic you're using, is to check your emotions. If you're like me and you maybe have some bad habits when it comes to news consumptions or echo chambers, be wary of how articles or posts generate these responses. It could be happiness, it could be anger, it could be satisfaction or feelings of superiority. Watch how phrasing and adjectives specifically trigger your emotional responses. Watch out for the following reactions to any news story. They can indicate that information is being manipulated to trigger personal bias. Misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation get shared because they confirm bias and generate emotional reactions. So watch out when you experience a strong reaction. It could be positive, it could be negative. If the emotional reaction is immediate, especially from just the headline alone, you need to be wary of both your state of mind before processing the information and the intention of the article that is appealing so quickly to your emotions. If you're feeling like you felt when you first saw the Death Star explode when watching Star Wars, when you read the headline to an article, you need to watch out. You're having an emotional reaction, you're getting excited or you're getting angry, and you should be able to process and verify the information before having that emotional reaction, whether it's celebratory, like watching the Death Star explode, or whether it's angry, like you just had a personal slight to yourself. The story may seem completely unbelievable or it may confirm your beliefs. If you dismiss or confirm the facts to yourself quickly or entirely without complete and critical evaluation, you should consider what kind of emotional ownership you're bringing to the table. And you should also consider how the source may be appealing to you as the target demographic. We're going to talk in a second about how, news is a business and it isn't free. You are the product. There's a reason that the algorithm knows to send me specific news, and I bet it knows what I want to hear about politics as well. The story makes you want to spend money or subscribe to a source or donate to a cause. That's also one of the ways that you need to check your emotions. If an article makes you want to raise a flag or donate to a cause or buy a product, you've been successfully marketed to, and you should take a second and go over what you've read again with a more critical lens. And again, it's not wrong to have emotional reactions. You just need to be critical about whether or not these emotional reactions are based in fact or something like confirmation bias, maybe misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. If your reaction is to immediately pass by the story on social media, in person, or by email or phone, and you've just read it immediately and you want to share it, you should examine the information more critically. Because if you want to pass it along immediately, if you see a headline and you say, "Oh, my friend needs to see this, they're interested in that," again, you've been marketed to, and the source is designed to get exponentially growing reactions. If something just seems so immediately shareable and you immediately think of another person or a group of people, you potentially bringing some form of confirmation bias to the table by wanting to share something. And it's because you think that it'll make somebody else happy or somebody else angry. It'll be approving or disapproving of their beliefs. Again, this is confirmation bias and it's contributing to some sort of an echo chamber. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't share news, but again, you should read it completely and understand it so that you're maybe not spreading on misinformation or disinformation. Verify and process objectively first. Remember that you have an obligation to yourself and to others as a community member to not spread misinformation. So again, what do we recommend? Well, we're not going to recommend one thing to you. We can't say that one news source is better than others. We can't say that there's one safe thing that will always be safe, that there is one standard of journalistic integrity that isn't going to change or isn't going to become compromised by ownership, et cetera, et cetera. The best thing that we can do is recommend a few tools to help you process and navigate and read diversely and have access to all of the best information as possible. We mentioned this a couple times, but in order to read diversely and explore different points of view without getting overwhelmed and potentially apathetic, we recommend that you use a news aggregator. Now, what is a news aggregator?
Thanks, Eddie. Now, as Eddie said, we are constantly being bombarded about news stories from different sources, from different points of view. And those news stories can elicit very different reactions sometimes, depending on the way that they are written, from the point of view that they are written by. Well, how can we go back and explore as many points of view as possible while still having an active life? It can seem very overwhelming to think that you need to go out and read 50 different news stories on a single topic in order to feel like you are informed. We understand that that's kind of a monumental task. There are, however, tools out there that you can use that will make reading from different points of view and reading from different news sources easier. One of the best tools out there is called news aggregators. Now, a news aggregator is a tool that takes multiple different news sources and puts them together in one place where you can read through them very quickly, where you're able to see multiple points of view from different sources, all from one place. One of the most popular news aggregators out there is actually Google News. What Google News does is it takes all of the different sources that it can find, anything that you could search for in Google, any source that you could search for. And on a particular topic, it will show you all of the articles that are currently published covering that story. Now, this includes things that are in print, if there are video clips of something coming from a cable news channel or a standard news channel. It even includes information coming from different social media outlets like Twitter. Google News on a single page will show you what the current headline is. And then at the bottom, there's a little box that says view full coverage. Clicking that box will show you every news source that Google can possibly find that is currently discussing that topic. So from time to time, you actually might find that you'll see things like from 5 or 6 news sources from one point of view, 5 or 6 from another point of view, but you can see very quickly where these stories are coming from. A lot of times you can tell a lot about what's going on just by seeing how the headlines are written for these articles. Now, I will definitely tell you, never just go by the headline of an article. A headline is not an article, and frequently headlines could be extremely misleading. So definitely go in and take a selection of different resources. Try to read a couple of articles from different places. Maybe you have a particular favorite news outlet. Go ahead and read the article from that news outlet, but definitely go back and try something from a different point of view. If nothing else, it will show you what the quote unquote other side of the political spectrum is currently thinking. It can be a really great exercise to see who isn't reporting something. If there's something going on in the news that you've heard about, but nobody else is reporting it, well, that tells you a couple of things, actually. It can tell you that either somebody's reporting something that they can't corroborate, or somebody's avoiding something because they don't want it to be talked about because it goes against either a business interest of theirs or a partnership of theirs. These can be very important things to keep in mind. So Google News is one of the easiest sources to get into to be able to see all of those different news articles in one place. When you're on the Google Chrome page or just the regular Google start sheet, it's google.com. There's always those 9 dots in the far right-hand corner of the screen. If you click on those 9 dots, you will see the Google News icon, and you can go there directly. Google News is free to use. Some of the sources that they quote, however, and provide links to may be paid sources. In a few minutes, Eddie's going to go over how you can actually access many of those paid sources for free and do so ethically so that we're not giving you illegal links on how to get to things. Another news aggregator is apnews.com. Now, AP is a newswire service. They are a group that goes together and they actually sell breaking news and reporting to different news outlets. It is a nonprofit group, though, that works as a cooperative. So they're not one of the groups that is making a profit off of this. But apnews.com pulls from different sources and makes those links available on their page as well. So it's a really great place to go to be able to see news articles that are being linked from different places, while you're also getting that original AP reporting that should be giving you the most factual news possible. Another news aggregator is called Smart News. Smart News actually lets you select the sources that you'd like to see. Now, this can be something that can be a little dangerous. You do want to make sure you're not just always getting your resources from the exact same sources. But the nice thing about it is you can always add or subtract the sources that you want to read from Smart News. It is another aggregator and it will pull news stories from all of the different resources that you decide you want to try. It's an app. You can actually download it to your phone or your tablet, and it's an easy place to go to get your headlines all in one place. Another resource is called Flipboard. Flipboard is a streamlined news service that learns what topics interest you. So even though it's going to be showing you the things that you've expressed an interest in, it will keep showing you different resources that are discussing those topics. Now, registration is required for Flipboard, but it allows you to set user preferences and it is free to utilize. They just want to have that registration so that they can tailor what they're delivering to you. Now, there's a bunch of other news aggregators listed on our news resources sheet that we gave you. That's the handout that at the very top says news resources. We have some of those different aggregators listed there. We also have a list of sources about getting to things like premium news articles, library services that we can get to you from here at WNPL. And the backside of that news resources page actually has some other resources that you can utilize too. It's things like that Which Face is Real website, which I definitely recommend you try. It's actually kind of an addictive thing to sit and try to figure out which images are AI and which ones are not. But there's other sources there too, things like Checkology, which is actually going to let you go through different classes that will teach you how to look for important things within a news article. It checks your information literacy. There's also something called Claimbuster, which is Facebook's automated fact-checking tool. That's what they use to flag things as being not accurately reported on Facebook. It's kind of neat to go in and see what they're actually utilizing for that. It is software, so it's not foolproof, but it is something that's kind of interesting to look at what their processes are. But there's other things too. There's things like the TV News Archive, which will let you see news articles from different points in time. And it lets you see news articles from anywhere across time on the internet. So that's a really wonderful source to try. So definitely take a look at the resources on that news resources handout. It includes some of the aggregators we've discussed here, but it includes some other tools too. And going through and utilizing these will help improve your technique for searching for news stories. It will also give you access to points of view that you might not have seen before. So they're really wonderful tools and we highly recommend them. Go ahead, Eddie.
Thanks, Rachel. You've probably all heard the phrase, there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's an old phrase and it's never truer. It actually showed up first in the El Paso Herald Post in 1938. So if there's no such thing as a free lunch, who's paying for the news I'm reading and why? Sometimes you'll notice that a lot of news is free, especially clickbaity articles that have outlandish headlines. They just can't stand you not reading them to the point where they'll pop up unwarranted on your browser. And a lot of times you can't get away from different podcasts that want to editorialize and give you their opinions so that they can sell things like mattresses or meal prep kits. Somebody's always paying for the news. And what are they selling us? And what is the product? And a lot of times the product is us, whether or not we're reading the article and potentially buying the things that's being advertised next to the article or sometimes in the article itself. We need to be aware of the transactioning that's happening between us and whoever's publishing the news. So some news is free, and other news sources, you have to pay for them, and they require a subscription or a paywall. Outlets will always cater to the perspectives of those who continue to support their business through viewership or advertising. So we have to be aware of that. But at the same time, it does seem like sometimes the more factual reporting or the more balanced editorials are often behind a paywall. Um, Again, editorials are not news. They are somebody's opinion of the news. And most news podcasts are editorials, and all news is a business. So we have to understand that no matter what we're reading, somebody has to pay for it. And in a lot of cases, it's better off if we pay for it ourselves. But in all cases, it's better if we know exactly who's paying for the news, what they're trying to sell us, and we can take that into consideration to make sure that we're reading things critically. Now, again, like we've said several times, newswire services like AP and Reuters have a business model that is based on factual accuracy. So again, it's a business, but what they're doing is they're trying to sell the concise information directly towards news outlets who, again, will later editorialize or build it into a larger context to report it to their specific audience. So AP and Reuters have a business model that is based on factual accuracy, but we still have to be reading and thinking critically. The publisher is always going to get paid somehow. If they're getting paid by advertisements, their content is going to emphasize traffic and could be designed to be inflammatory and shareable. So if they're telling their advertisers, "Hey, we get X amount of people coming to our site," and their advertisers are saying, well, we can pay this much for advertising based on that traffic, there's going to be an incentive to boost traffic. And again, it's always going to be a temptation for them to post things that are sometimes put out of context to be more enticing, more inflammatory, and more shareable so that it continues to spread. If it's a subscription, be aware that there could be an appeal to a demographic or a specific following. If it's a representative of a company or agency, it will never be objective or critical of that institution and only serves to market that product. Again, this is why newswires can be a huge benefit because they are being paid by other competing publishers to deliver factual and timely accuracy. Chances are more objective news will rely on more traditional revenue streams like subscriptions or physical sales than the compromising presence of advertisers, sponsors, or web traffic. This can be a problem for readers like me and some of us that can't afford 4 to 5 paid subscriptions. And we know that only one subscription isn't enough to read critically, which is why we need tools that are ethical ways to avoid paywalls. Now, up top on the screen, this is what a paywall looks like. When you try to read an article on a website or you try to get a physical copy and you just can't because you have to pay the base price to access the article. There are 2 types of paywalls, hard paywalls and soft paywalls. A hard paywall is either a pop-up or a sign-in page that prevent you from reading anything before you pay for a subscription or access. Hard paywall, again, you're going to have to sign in or you're going to have to pay specifically for the article that you're trying to read. So what are some ethical ways to avoid paywalls? The first is my favorite, and that's to use a library. The library, specifically WNPL or your local library, will have local and national daily and weekly newspapers in both print and database form. We have online news databases, including stuff like the Chicago Tribune and the Wall Street Journal, and we have consumer reports, and we have a lot of access to different periodicals and newspapers through our Press Reader News app. So when in doubt, you can always take advantage of the library, and we will pay for these subscriptions and share them with the community so that you have access to the most diverse and best information possible. Another way to avoid paywalls is to use the Internet Archive, and that can be found at archive.org. And they use something called the Wayback Machine that scans and takes intermittent photos of all pages on the internet, including articles that are behind popular paywalls. So the Internet Archive is constantly archiving different websites, different news sites, and staving them for posterity for the future. And what's nice about this is that you can actually go back and read articles that are behind paywalls. Now, you can't read day of articles from things like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, but if you're willing to wait 24 24 hours to critically read an article, you can use the Wayback Machine to access that information. Now, there are also ways to handle soft paywalls. Soft paywalls are things like a pop-up that maybe says, okay, you've read 5 articles this month and you need to subscribe if you want to read more articles. A couple ways that you can handle soft paywalls are to use incognito mode or private browsing, depending on whether or not you're using Chrome or Safari or Internet Explorer. They all have these ways of using incognito mode or private browsing so that it doesn't know that you've already read your 5 articles. This can be helpful, especially if you're limited to 5 articles, but you have multiple members of the family that are using the same computer. Just signing into incognito mode, again, is an ethical way of accessing things that are behind a soft paywall. Another thing that you can do for soft paywalls, if the article is starting to load and you get that pop-up that says, oh, you need to subscribe if you want to continue reading this, you can also hit cancel. So up on your browser, if you scroll up to the left, there's going to be the button that's a circular arrow. And currently, when your page is totally loaded, it'll be a refresh. So when you start to refresh or you start to load a new page, it'll show up as an X, and you can actually stop the page from loading before that pop-up comes up. So you'll have to sort of time it out well so that you can cancel the loading before the pop-up comes, but at the same time, making sure that your story fully loads. But again, if you're desperate to read an article and you feel like it has critical information, before you go to the library, and if you can't afford to support the journal directly at this time, it's a way to read information as much as possible. When in doubt, though, you can always, it never hurts to support a news agency and understand that, there's no such thing as a free lunch. But the best thing that you can do is to use the library to contact us, and we will do our best to help you access the information as much as we are able. So again, if you're asking the question, which news source is the best? The only answer we can give you is none of the above. There is no perfect news source. Everything is a business, and everything is going to have either something to sell you, or it's going to be one perspective, and it's going to be limited by their resources and their reporting. And the best thing you can do is read diversely.
Absolutely, Eddie. I completely agree. The very best advice that we can give you tonight is to try as many sources as possible, to always do your due diligence when you're reading anything. Remember that all news is trying to make a profit. This includes the mainstream news media. It also includes resources that would claim to not be mainstream news media. This is still a business. They want your dollars, and that includes any dollars that they can convince you to spend with them, whether it's through their advertisers, through subscriptions, through donations. So please keep in mind, try as many sources as you can. If you're truly confused and you really feel like you're not finding the sources that you would like, please reach out to us here at the library. Eddie and I both work at the Adult Services Desk, and we make all of our different resources freely available to the public. We will be more than happy to help you out, to try to find a list of resources for you, including specific articles or just a list of sources that you could try. We definitely want you to come in and try to use our resources here at the library, but we want you to have the tools walking away tonight to be able to go and read the news and enjoy what you're able to read. There's going to be some labor involved. However, I think you will find that if you're following the principles we're talking about here tonight, you'll find that your consumption of the news is a little bit easier on you, that you'll have a better understanding of why some news is presented one way and some is presented another, and you'll have the tools to go out and feel more confident in the sources you're selecting. Don't forget about the handouts that we sent you. We did send you the Navigating the News Tactics bookmark. This is a really great thing to kind of keep next to your computer so that you can remember the things to look out for when you're looking through the news. You want to make sure that you are not just reading things that completely confirm or actually completely go against your beliefs. You want to make sure you're avoiding the sources that make you want to spend money right away. You want to make sure that you're avoiding just sharing things immediately because you have a strong reaction to them. You also want to make sure that you're just watching your emotions as you're reading the news. The different news outlets are trying to pull on your emotions. They're trying to get you to feel a specific way because it makes them money. You keep tuning in then. On the back side of that bookmark, we want you to remember the different things that you can do when you're navigating the news. Check who the author is and who the background search is on what's being provided. Look for full direct quotes and other information that support the information you're being given. Check on the timeliness of the story. Check on the context of the story. Verify the sources that are quoted. And again, identify all the different media that's being shown to you. Is the video clip that you're being shown a real video clip, or is that something taken from a video game? That unfortunately has happened a lot recently with stories between the war between Ukraine and Russia. A lot of the footage that was being shared was actually taken from video games. And if you have a hard time with finding any of those resources to help you answer those questions, please reach out to the library for us to help you. We're always happy to do that. How about you, Eddie?
Absolutely. I can't agree more. We're always here to help you. I understand that it sounds like a very daunting process to remember all of these things. But again, if you approach the news in good faith and remember some of the things that we've talked about, like checking our emotions, understanding our emotional ownership of different subjects that we're interacting with, be cognizant of the dangers of an echo chamber or confirmation bias, and making sure that we're just aware of the different ways that we can fall into the traps of misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation. Things like science headlines that are being reported way too soon for the scientific method and process. Making sure that we're understanding how, deep fakes and Photoshop and, uh, you know, time and dates that are being used to make it seem like something is more immediately relevant than it is. These things are habits that we can form, that it'll become easier and easier. And if we're proactive in these ways, and also other ways, like we talked about, reading diversely, we have so many different things here at the library that will build up your reading skills. We have reading challenges, we have book recommendations, we have broad collections of things that we can offer you to help you build your skills as a critical reader, that will help you in ways that will, give you strength to navigate the news. If you're always reading mystery and you never read anything else, we recommend you try a different genre, and that'll test your critical thinking skills, and it'll test your comfort levels to the point where you're going to become a better reader and you're going to navigate the news better. So all of the things we've talked about, I know that they sound daunting, and I know it sounds like a lot, but again, it's all packaged up in approaching the news in good faith and being willing to take it seriously, and using our library and each other as guides and resources will never steer you wrong. So thank you.
If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask a question down in the Q&A, or you can ask a question in the chat. If you find that you have questions after tonight's presentation is over, which happens all of the time for all of us, please feel free to reach out. You can email the General Adult Services Desk at askus@wnpl.info. Those questions come right into the reference desk, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, both about tonight's presentation and really any other questions that you may have. We can do things like find you phone numbers. We can help you try to track down individuals. We can find reading materials for you, news, or other general information questions. You can also, on our website, there's a little chat link. So if you have a question during the day and you just want to quickly ask a chat question, you would just click on the chat bubble at wnpl.info, and we'll be able to answer your question that way. You can also reach out to Eddie and myself directly. Eddie's email is ekristan@wnpl.info. Mine is rmurray@wnpl.info. Either one of us will be more than happy to help you out at any time. But thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, we will go ahead and answer them at this time. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize chat was disabled. Let's see. Let's see. Mine is showing that chat should be on. Go ahead and you can ask, if you have a question that you'd like to ask within the question and answer, you can absolutely do that. You can also send us an email and we'll be able to get that immediately here. We did have some questions during the presentation that we just answered outright, but they were things, asking specific questions about when we were talking about being overloaded by information, particularly over the last 2 years. We have all been kind of overloaded over the last few years. There's been a lot of negative news out there. There's been a lot of sad news out there. So yes, that's absolutely been a fatigue that all of us have been dealing with. So yes, that is something that has happened along the lines to all of us. So don't feel like you're alone in that regard. It is absolutely something that everybody has experienced. It's something that I think we will continue to have, unfortunately, be inundated with it as time goes on. I do apologize. It does look like chat is disabled right now. It might be because we're in a webinar instead of a meeting. I'm thinking that the webinar wants to force us to use the question and answer as opposed to the chat function. But that's also unfortunately why you can't see Eddie's video, even though I have him set up to use video. I'm not quite sure why it's not letting him, but Eddie is definitely here, as you heard him throughout the presentation. But if you have other questions, as we go along, please feel free to go ahead and email them to us. We will be happy to answer them for you.
Yeah, we are here. We are able to see the question and answer. I apologize if chat isn't working. It might be something to do, like Rachel said, with the webinar settings. But if you have any questions or comments and you want to put them in the Q&A, if you see on the bar at the bottom there, we will be able to see that and answer it.
And once this video compiles, one of the reasons why we did this as a webinar is because it's easier for us to record it. We did go ahead and we recorded this presentation. If you registered for this class, I will be sending you a copy of the recording. So it doesn't always compile immediately. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. So you might want to look for that tomorrow. I will try to send that out to everyone. But we really do appreciate your time and attention tonight. Again, if you have further questions after we end our session tonight, please feel free to reach out. We'll be very happy to help you out.